Okay, it is 11 o'clock. We are in the home stretch, everyone. This is the last session of our first day of the exempt conference. Certainly not of any less significance here. We're our technical nonprofit update. So I know I've gone through these housekeeping items, but for those who are new to the conference, just joining this session, I'm going to repeat them. There is some confusion going on in Zoom. When you log into Zoom, it's your login to Zoom and how you have your settings. If you could attempt to update that to your first and last name as opposed to initials, it will help us to match you up so we can properly send your CPE certificate. So that's going to be in your Zoom settings as opposed to what was previously suggested that you could scroll over your picture for this session. Your picture is invisible because everything is behind the scenes. So we apologize for that, and that would be in your Zoom settings. So this session will be recorded, so we will share the recording as well as the slide deck with everyone by the end of the week. So you can look for that. It'll be in an email. It'll also be posted to our website. So you can check back onto the events page and find that information for all the sessions. Both chat and Q&A are enabled. So if you have any comments or questions for me, if you could use the chat feature. As far as questions for both Jenna and Julia, if you could put those in the question box. And then at the end of every session, there's a CHAR500 session and a 1099 section. We will address those questions at the end of each of the sections in the presentation. The CHAR500 will be first and then followed by the 1099. I know everyone wants CPE. CPE will be given for this session. You'll get an email from support@prolera.com, and I'll put all of that information in the chat. You will have to answer all 4 polling questions. I know technically you only need to answer 3 of the 4, but it is a best practice to please answer all 4. Sometimes we get a technical glitch, and that way you'll be sure to get your CPE credit. So again, if you have any questions, everyone has my email by now, but I will put it in the chat as well. A survey will launch at the end of this session. If you could please complete it. In addition, when you get your CPE certificate, there'll also be a survey for you to complete. That's optional, but again, we always appreciate all of your feedback. So enough from me. I know everyone is sick of hearing from me. We're gonna transfer now to Jenna and Julia. I'll make a quick introduction. Jenna is a manager in our audit department. She's a CPA and she conducts audit field work for public and private foundations, governmental entities, and of course, nonprofit organizations. Julia is a member of our tax team. She's a senior accountant here. She joined the firm in 2014. And in addition to her work on IRS Form 1099, she serves both individuals and businesses and also does some work in our international tax department. So I'm gonna pass it on to Jenna and Julia, and take it away, guys.
Thank you so much, Maria. So as Maria mentioned, I'm Jenna Sheehan. I am joined by Julia Houston. We're gonna go spend the next hour going through a few updates and best practices for nonprofits. I will start with CHAR500 and then turn it over to Julia for the Form 1099. So our agenda, as I mentioned, I'll start with the CHAR500. We'll go through a quick refresher of general filing requirements and then get into the required electronic filing. We'll walk through the 10-step process for filing your CHAR500 electronically. And then I'll end my section with a reference slide with some helpful links and guidance. Julia will then take you through the different 1099 forms, some of the best practices with all of those forms, and then she'll also have a reference slide that will have helpful links for filing 1099s. So starting with a CHAR500 refresher, what is the CHAR500? It is your annual financial filing through New York State for charitable organizations. If you are registered with the Charities Bureau, you are generally required to annually file this form. It's required even if you do meet a reporting exemption or if you don't have to file a Form 990 in certain years. The only charitable entities that would be exempt from filing would be trusts that are not wholly charitable, but have charitable interests, and estates with charitable interests. Otherwise, you will typically be filing a CHAR 500 each year. There are annual reporting exemptions that would require only the first few parts of the CHAR 500 to be completed. So under the 7A filing exemption, if your total contributions from New York State residents, governments, foundations, corporations, anything like that did not exceed $25,000 during the filing year, and you did not engage a professional fundraiser, you would qualify under that exemption. And under EPTL filing exemption, if your gross receipts did not exceed $25,000, or the market value of your assets did not exceed $25,000, that would be at any point during the year. So if they did cross that threshold at some point during the year, you would not qualify under that part. But if you meet those two criteria, you would qualify under the EPTL filing exemption. If you are a dual filer, you would have to certify under both exemptions to qualify. And as I mentioned previously, there would be some cases that you wouldn't have to file a Form 990 in certain years. So if your gross receipts don't meet certain thresholds, you may be exempt from filing the 990, but again, that does not exempt you from filing the CHAR 500. So the state does not have any similar requirements similar to the federal requirements. There are 3 different registration categories that will be indicated on your filing. First is 7A, and this is if an organization is registered to solicit contributions in New York under Article 7A. The second is EPTL, or the Estates, Powers, and Trust Law. And this is if an organization holds assets or conducts activity within New York State, and these activities would have to be for charitable purposes. Dual filers would essentially fall under both of these categories, so they solicit contributions as well as hold assets or conduct activities for charitable purposes. Looking at the due dates for these filings, depending on your registration category, the due dates will vary. If you're a 7A or a dual filer, your filing is due 4.5 months after year end. There is an automatic 180-day extension available. Unlike the Form 990, where you have to file an extension request, there is no forms to file for the state side. It's an automatic extension. So just kind of putting this into practice, if your year end is December 31st, your first due date under 7A or dual would be May 15th, and then it would be extended under that 180 days to November 15th. On the other hand, EPTL, this is a different due date. It would be due 6 months after year end, again with that same 180-day automatic extension. So using that same example of December 31st year end, your return would be due June 30th or December 31st if extended. So what documentation is required to be filed with your CHAR 500? First, we'll start with what did you file with the federal government, with the IRS? So whether you filed a 990, 990EZ, 990N, which is the postcard, or 990PF for private foundations, those would all be required to be filed with your CHAR 500. If your organization completes a Form 990T for unrelated business income, that would also be required to be submitted with your CHAR 500. And then the last relating to your Form 990 is Schedule B. So there is a little asterisk here because we will get into some more detail on what is required for Schedule B. There are a couple options that you have with the online filing that you can choose from. So we'll go through those in a few slides. And then for 7A or dual filers, financial statement requirement. So there's different thresholds that you have to meet, and depending on where your revenue is for that year will dictate what you have to submit. So if your total revenue and support is under $250,000, you do not have to submit any audited or reviewed financial statements. If your total revenue and support is between $250,000 and $1 million, you're required to submit a review report. And then finally, if your revenue is in excess of $1 million, you are required to submit audited financial statements. There is a dual filer exemption. So if you claim the 7A filing exemption, you do not need to submit a review report or audited financial statements. So why are we talking about this now? Many of you have been filing your CHAR 500 for years. You send it in with the payment, you get your signatures, no big deal. So why are we bringing this up now? Effective September 19th, 2022, all CHAR 500 filings are required to be electronically filed through the New York State Charities filing website. So just to kind of go through what are some of the advantages of doing this online. First, it eliminates the manual signatures. So instead of having to pass the paper form around to get the two different signatures from two different people, it's now all electronic. So your signers will receive an email to electronically sign the form. It also eliminates the need for cutting a check, having it signed, attaching it to your return, and then also a trip to the post office. So especially if you are up against a deadline, making sure you're getting to the post office to make sure it's postmarked by the filing due date. That's all gone now. It's all electronic as long as it's submitted by the due date. No issues with the filing date. So now that we're kind of going to get into what the form is and what you have to do to be ready, there is a checklist available prior to starting the filing. So if you are the individual that is going to be responsible for the filing, you'll have to create your account with the Charities Bureau. So once that's submitted, or once that's created, you are all set and ready to begin your filing. So this checklist it'll come up as a prompt before you start your filing. You can skip it or you can choose to do it. And all it does is it really takes you through each piece of the filing, making sure that you have the information needed to complete the filing. Just a quick side note here, if you do start your filing, but then realize you don't have a copy of your 990 or you're missing an email address that's needed, you can save and exit, and then you can get back into the form when you're ready to complete it. So it's not a one and done thing. You can do it as time permits. So starting with the first polling question, do you already have an account set up with the Charities Bureau?
Just as in the previous presentations, everyone, we will give everyone a few minutes to do this and then share the results. And it looks like we're almost at 100%. So we'll give it another few seconds and then I'll share the results with everyone and Jenna can comment. All right. Last chance. I give it 3 more seconds. Okay, we'll end the poll and Jenna, I will share the results.
Okay, so about 42% yes, 58% no, so almost an even split. So we'll kind of go through what it's going to take to set up your account, get started with your annual filing. So getting started. Once you have signed into your account and either completed the checklist or chose to skip that checklist, you'll have 2 buttons that you can click on. The first is the Begin Annual Filing, and that'll get you right into your submission. The tips for completing a new filing will bring you to the Charities Bureau website, and you'll be able to find some FAQs on New York State Charities, general information, and then also additional information on the filing. I'll mention this in a couple slides, but this is also where you can obtain any previously submitted CHAR 500s registration documents through either an EIN, a registration number, or a name search. So once you begin your annual filing, you're asked for a few pieces of information. The one note here is if you are filing for any year after 2019, it can be electronically filed. Otherwise, 2018 and previous will have to be paper filed, and you can click on that link and get the appropriate paper forms. So the New York State registration number is the first piece of information you're going to enter. You can find this in a couple different places, either on your previously filed CHAR 500, through the Charities Bureau website, like I mentioned, through that name or EIN search, and then also if you have a copy of your New York State Notice of Registration, it will be on there as well. The last thing on this screen that you'll need is your fiscal year beginning and ending date. Again, making sure that this just agrees back to what's on your Form 990. So just making sure when you're doing your CHAR 500, any information that is also on your Form 990, making sure that those are consistent. So once you begin your filing, you have 30 days to complete it. After 30 days, the form actually expires and you'll have to start a new filing. The state does send you reminders along the way if you've started the filing, you haven't submitted it, or you haven't sent it for signature. So as I mentioned, the CHAR500 is completed in 10 steps. They are all listed on this slide. We'll go through each of them. I've provided screenshots of what each step will look like, what the inputs will be, just kind of as a guide as you go through your own filing. So the contact information is really the most information you'll have to enter. The third-party preparer, registration category, public charity, and annual exemption are really just a set of yes or no questions or questions that you'll select from a range. The financial information, filing information, and then signatures will be the only other places you'll have to really enter information in that's related to your organization. Documents is where you'll upload those required documents that we had spoken about. And then you'll have a chance to review everything before it really gets finalized and sent for signatures. So we'll get into each of the steps after our next polling question. So have you already electronically filed your CHAR 500?
We'll give everyone a few more seconds. Thank you. Okay, last chance, everyone. I'll give it about 5 more seconds. A few last minute ones trickling in. Okay, we will end the poll and here are the results, Jenna.
Okay, so a little bit more of a no response this time. So this will be a good way to just kind of get yourselves familiar with the forms and kind of see the information that you'll need to enter. So we'll start right in with the contact information. So this first section is, some of it'll be pre-populated, and that's just based on what you've already entered, and then that'll pull some information with what is on file with the Charities Bureau. So the organization name, registration number, registration category, and year end will all populate based on what is already on file or what you've already entered in the previous slide. You'll enter your EIN, which again can be found on your 990 or your IRS documentation. The organization type is a dropdown, and you'll be able to select from corporation, LLC, partnership, trust, sole proprietorship, or other. And then the next dropdown will be your tax exempt status. And this will give you each of the 501c categories. So if you're a 501c3, C4, C6, you'll be able to select that. These two pieces of information will also be on the page 1 of your Form 990. So just ensuring that this information matches as you are inputting the information. That's just kind of a good check. And then if your fiscal year end has changed, you'll select yes, and you can then find another box to the right of that will populate, and you can select your new fiscal year end date. And then the last couple things on this is the organization's email and phone number. Those are required fields, whereas the organization website is not a required field, and that's just because some organizations may not have a website of their own. So when you file this form, it'll either show up as blank or NA if nothing is input in the organization website. The second part of the contact information is the organization's mailing address. So that's the last piece of information that'll really pre-populate based on previous information that's been filed. If you've changed your address, you'll select yes, and new address fields will populate. And then if your mailing address is different than your principal or primary address and you select yes, you'll get yet another set of address lines to fill out. And then the last piece of information under the primary contact information, this really should just be your main point of contact for your organization. So for general inquiries, it doesn't have to be the signers of this form. It also doesn't have to be the person that's created the filing. So it's really just that person that someone would reach out to should they have general inquiries about your organization. You'll need the individual's first and last name, their title, email address, and also their phone number. So just kind of as an example, many times we see that the primary contact will be the organization's executive director or their president, but the individual submitting the form is their accountant or their director of finance. So it really doesn't have to be the same person. Whoever has created the filing will be the person that gets the email follow-ups or any questions. If you have any issues with your filing, it'll go to the person that has created the form. And then the last contact information is what IRS form does your organization submit? So you have the option to select 990, the 990EZ, 990N, or 990PF. So the series of your 990 that your organization files can vary from year to year. So just making sure that you are reviewing what has been submitted to the IRS for that year and selecting the correct form. If you select anything other than the 990PF, you'll just be asked if your organization is a public charity or other 990 series filer. If you select 990PF, you will have to confirm that your organization is in fact a private foundation. Next step is answering the yes or no question related to the third-party preparer. As you can see on this slide, the third-party preparer is underlined in green. And what that is there's a definition available. So if you were to mouse over that, it'll give you a definition, a description of what the Charities Bureau is looking for here. So that'll go for any phrase or word that's underlined throughout the submission. So that's a helpful little tip or trick if you're looking for what is the Charities Bureau truly looking for with those questions. So you'll select no if you're completing the submission for yourself. If an external party is submitting the form on your behalf, you'll select yes. Once you do that, there's additional contact information that will populate. One thing to note here that if you are having a third party complete your submission, they do have to complete it all the way through. It can't be transferred at any point. You would have to delete the filing and restart it. So if you are giving this over to a third party, you will have to provide them with your payment information, whether that's your credit card information or your bank information to submit an e-check. So just make sure you're keeping in mind that little fact when determining who is going to be submitting your filing. Next piece is the registration category. So this is where you're going to determine or confirm your organization's registration category. The first question relates to whether your organization conducts activity in New York State other than soliciting. So examples of conducting activity would include maintaining an office, having employees in New York State, running a program, or providing grants. The next question is whether your organization holds assets in New York State. So that'll include any cash, investments, real estate, inventory, accounts receivable, things of that nature. Third question asks if the organization solicits or plans to solicit or receive more than $25,000 annually in total contributions from New York State residents, foundations, governments, corporations. The little green underline there, they define soliciting as directly or indirectly requesting contributions. They do make note to ensure that that everyone knows that this does include grants, so not just individual contributions. And then soliciting contributions does not actually need to result in receiving a contribution. So just keeping that in mind when you're answering that $25,000 threshold question. And then the final question in this section is relating to professional fundraisers and fundraising councils. So a professional fundraiser is an organization that manages, conducts, or assists with solicitation and is actually paid by the organization for its work. A fundraising council, they plan or advise an organization on its fundraising campaigns, but they do not actually solicit contributions, and they would have no access to those contributions. So we are on to step 4 of 10. So this is where you will confirm your organization's public charity category. So this question seems very repetitive. We see a lot about whether you're soliciting contributions and whether you have assets in New York State. So did you solicit any sort of contribution during the year? And if you select no, you will not see any remaining questions on this slide. But if you select yes, you'll see that 2 additional questions pop up. The first is, have you submitted your Schedule B to the IRS for the reporting period? And then if you say yes to that, you'll have an option. So you have 2 different options on how to submit your Schedule B. If you say no, that you have not submitted Schedule B, you only have one option. You only have the option to submit the range. So as I mentioned, there's 2 options for Schedule B. You have we'll start with the second, submit a redacted Schedule B. If you have your Schedule B available from your Form 990, we just do warn you that the public disclosure requirements are a little bit different than what is required by the New York State Charities Bureau. And this is because the 990 can omit all information other than the dollar amount, whereas the Charities Bureau is requesting a Schedule B that has your dollar amount and the state in which the contribution was from. So just keeping that in mind, that may cause a little bit of a hang-up. If you choose to enter your New York State contributions, you'll select these from a wide variety of ranges. So there's 9 ranges to choose from, anywhere from 0 to $24,999, up to more than $50 million. So did notice that the ranges aren't entirely consistent. So if you look from 100,000 to 249,000, you lose that gap of 249 to 250,000. So just some of those things that are probably being tweaked as the online filing system continues to develop. So just keeping that in mind when you are selecting your contribution range. The one thing to note here is this should be determined based on your accounting method as indicated on your 990. So this isn't just cash receipts. If you're an accrual basis filer, you should be including the revenue that was recorded from each individual or corporation foundation within New York State. Next up is your annual exemption. So this is where you will determine your registration status based on all of the previous questions that you've already answered. And then one final question, and this is whether your gross receipts were under $25,000 and the market value of your assets were under $25,000 during the fiscal year. If your filing status hasn't changed from the previous year, when you click Save and Continue, you will be brought to the next step, which is the financial information page. If this organization, for example, a typical dual filer, were to select that their gross receipts and assets were under $25,000, it would change the registration to 7A, as they met the annual reporting exemption for EPTL that we discussed in the previous slide. So just being careful that you're really reading these questions, making sure you're answering them accurately, because it can affect what your registration category is. Looking at this conversely is if this organization was typically a 7A filer, but all of the questions that they've answered have indicated that they should be a dual filer, the system does pick this up and it would give you another option to review any possible exemptions for your organization. So there's a set of questions that will pop up if you are typically a 7A filer, but it has pulled up that you are dual, and we'll go into those in the next slide. So exemption qualifications. So you'll see that first question, it says, would you like to check to see if your organization meets any of the exemption requirements or criteria. Once you click yes, the next set of questions will come up. So the possible exemptions do include New York State education law, historical societies chartered by the Board of Regents, hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, or diagnostic centers, membership organizations, volunteer fire or ambulance services, cemeteries, and then organizations that are incorporated under Article 43 of the New York State insurance law. So if you are able to select yes on any of those questions, it will switch, as you can see here, to a 7A filer. So having your prior CHAR 500 handy just to make sure that your registration category is consistent, and that being said, with all of your other activity being consistent year to year, that'll just be a good way to check to make sure you have entered all of the information correctly. So the next step, we'll look at the financial information. So we'll have two slides on this. There's one for the 990 and then one for the 990 EZ. Other than the 990 PF, the information that is requested is going to be identical. So you'll see that there's really no variation other than in that first box where it says which form does the organization use, and that's pre-populated based on what you had answered in the contact information section. So you'll see it asks for the total contributions, total revenue, and net assets. It gets into the level of detail of where to find this on your form. So total contributions, as you can see, there's that little gray italicized blurb that says Part 1, Line 8, Current Year column. So if you have any issues finding where that is, just refer to the lines there and you can be confident that you're pulling the correct information. One thing to note here is that the Charities Bureau does, in fact, look at this information, compare it to your 990 because it does have to be uploaded with your filing. So if they are inconsistent, you will be notified and you'll have to navigate to resubmit your information. So then again, just looking at 990 EC, very similar other than your reference lines have changed, as well as that grayed out 990 versus 990 EZ. So this is another double check that if your references don't line up with the form that you are looking at that you've submitted with the IRS, you may have to go back and just check your inputs that you selected the correct form. And then the last piece of information on that is just related to any close of registration, withdrawals of registration, and if you are dissolving your organization. If you select any of those, you'll just have to confirm whether or not this is your final filing with New York State. Moving on to filing information. So this will contain information about professional fundraisers and your government grants. So the first we'll go through is the professional fundraising, and we'll move on to government grants after that. So if you've used a professional fundraiser or a fundraising council, you'll select yes. I elected to not put the screenshot in here just because there were a lot of inputs on there and the text got very small. So I've just included what would be required as part of the inputs. So information required, the name of the firm, the 6-digit New York State registration number. They do have a little note underneath the registration number that fundraisers must be registered to operate in New York State. The other information is your contract start and end date, the phone number, address, description of services, description of compensation, and then the amount paid to the fundraiser. So this information, if you have filed this with your CHAR 500 previously, is all consistent. You need all of the same information. The one thing that we have noted as we've looked at this form is there is a minimum of 250 characters required to be input for the description of services and the description of compensation arrangements. So typically we see that you can only input a certain amount of characters, but it's opposite on this. It is a minimum. So you may just have to enhance your descriptions of the services and compensation to meet that required amount of characters. So then the next piece is the government grants. So if your organization has received any government grants during the year, you'll have to report each agency separate. There's no description requirement. So if you received multiple grants from the same government agency, those can all be input as one amount, but you do have to list each one. There's no dollar threshold for this form, so you do have to include every single government grant received. A good check on this is looking at your Form 990, the statement of revenue, where your government grants are listed. So just making sure that those numbers also agree. Last couple slides. So we're on to documents. This is where you'll upload the required documents. There's a specific section for an audit or review report if required. There's also a separate section for your IRS document. Your IRS document should not include Schedule B. There is a note on this section that indicates that, so just as a reminder to not include that. Once you've chosen your IRS document file, you do have to click upload. It will not show up until you click upload. And at that point, it'll change to a little table that'll have the document name, the type, and then whether there's an option to delete it. So if you've selected the wrong document, you can go back, delete it, and re-upload. If you have a 990T, that'll be included in other documents, as well as Schedule B. If you've chosen to submit your redacted Schedule B, that'll go up in other documents. And then once it's uploaded, you'll be able to see everything that is there. And then if it's in compliance with the size requirements. So you'll see at the top of this slide that there is size requirements for the different documentation that is required to be submitted. So just making sure that those are all in compliance as you're uploading. Last two steps of the process, review and signatures. So the review page will show you all of the information that you have already entered. This is just really the time to double check your contact information, all of the answers to your contribution, asset questions, your government grants, and fundraising. Once you've reviewed the form, you can move on to the signatures. So no change with the previous year filings. Two signatures are still required. The first being the president or an authorized trustee. The second being the CFO or treasurer. Signatures are all electronic, so you'll need an email address for each of the signers. If you do end up incorrectly inputting an email or it was sent to the wrong individual, you do have the option to go back in and update the email addresses. Once they've been sent, you just have to go in, select update filing, and then you can navigate to the very end of the form to update the signatures. You can also resend signatures if for some reason the signers have not received it. There is a delay. Sometimes I think it notes that it'll be about 15 minutes at most, that once the form is submitted, that the signer should receive the notification that it is available for signature. Just making sure that you check your junk, the spam folders, just in case it gets lost in there, but you can resend it if they have not received it after that 15-minute time frame. So now what? You have submitted your filing. Signers have 15 days to electronically sign the return. Once both of those signatures have been received, the preparer of the form will actually receive an email to make the required payment. You can do that either through credit card or e-check. The only form of payment that is not, or form of credit card that is not accepted currently is an American Express. So just keeping that in mind. And then incomplete filing notices. So once you've submitted, the Charities Bureau will go through and review the information. So if there was anything missing or you have entered any information incorrectly within the form, you just have to log back in, click update your filing, and then go to whatever section it is to update the information that triggered that incomplete filing. And then you'll just have to resend it for signatures, and both of your signers will have to re-sign the form. So that is really the filing with some tips, tricks, and things we've kind of noticed along the way. The next slide will have some helpful links for you. So the website to file, the Charities Bureau search that we discussed, and then there's also an annual filing guide. So this is a PDF and it kind of walks you through each of the steps of the form, similar to this presentation. So that is a handy resource if you need it as you're going through. So
We'll share those. I will share those in the link and the chat in a minute, but we do have a question. And I also want to call your attention to the time. We have about 10 minutes left. So we'll quickly answer this question. I am involved with a newer charitable organization. We filed 990N for the first 2 years, but we are not aware of this state form. Can we submit this form for these years ASAP, or do we need to do something special?
I will have to take a look into a little bit more of the filing requirements just on previous returns. So if we can.
Yeah, so if this individual is listed as anonymous, so if you want to reach out to me, my email is in the chat, Maria, then I can forward it to Jenna, and we can get that answered, and you guys can speak offline. So we will certainly reply and get that information to you. So we do have two more polling questions, everyone, so hang tight. So we'll turn it over to Julia and we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Julia, and today I will be discussing the filing requirements for Form 1099 and some best practices when issuing and receiving 1099s. Specifically, we will look at Form 1099 NEC, 1099 Miscellaneous, and 1099K. And also, similar to Jenna, at the end of the presentation, I've also included some various links to IRS resources as a reference. Starting with Form 1099 NEC, this form is used to report non-employee compensation of $600 or more. Beginning with the 2020 tax year, the IRS required businesses to report non-employee compensation on Form 1099 NEC instead of on Form 1099 Miscellaneous. Form 1099 Miscellaneous is still used for various other items, which we will go through in detail later, but non-employee compensation is now reported on Form 1099 NEC. Non-employee compensation includes commissions, prizes, awards for services performed as a non-employee, and other forms of compensation for services performed for your trade or business by an individual who is not your employee. And it's important to note that Form 1099 NEC must be filed and a copy furnished to the recipient by January 31st. Next slide, please. The slide below acts as a quick checklist when trying to determine if Form 1099 NEC should be filed. So going through, if the following conditions are met, you must generally report a payment as non-employee compensation. You made the payment to someone who is not your employee. You made the payment for services in the course of your trade or business, which includes government agencies and nonprofit organizations. You made payments to an individual, partnership, estate, or in some cases, a corporation. You made payments to the payee of at least $600 during the year. If you're unsure if the type of payment qualifies, the next two slides provide several examples that can be used as a reference. Next slide. The following are some examples of payments to be reported in box 1 as non-employee compensation: professional service fees paid to attorneys, accountants, architects, etc. Fees paid by one professional to another, such as referral fees, payments by attorneys to witnesses or experts. Continuing to the next slide. Commissions paid to non-employee salespersons, a fee paid to a non-employee, including independent contractor, or travel reimbursement for which the non-employee did not account to the payer. Please also note that Form 1099 NEC must be filed for each person for whom you have withheld any federal income tax, and that's regardless of the payment amount. And the federal withholding is reported in box 4. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with Form 1099 NEC, this is what it looks like. On the top left, this is where the payer's name, address, and identification number are entered. On the bottom left, this is where the recipient's name, address, and identification number are listed. And as previously discussed, non-employee compensation is listed in box 1 and the federal withholding in box 4. Looking at boxes 5 through 7, those are reserved for state information. They don't need to be completed for the IRS. And we recommend that you refer to the instructions for further detail if you do have state payments that need to be included. The next form we will be discussing is 1099 miscellaneous. But first, we will address polling question number 3. Who prepares your annual Form 1099s, accountant or tax preparer, or are they prepared internally?
And also you'll note that there is a part 2 of that question, which is, are you attending this webinar to earn CPE credit? So if you could complete both, and we'll give it a few more seconds. Here. All right. Last chance here real quick. I'm going to end the poll and we'll share the results.
So it's pretty close, but majority is prepared internally, which is great. So looking at Form 1099 miscellaneous next, this should be filed for each person in the course of your business to whom you have paid the following during the year. At least $10 in royalties, at least $600 in rent, prizes, and awards, other income. Continuing to the next slide, medical and healthcare payments, crop insurance proceeds, gross proceeds paid to an attorney. There is one of the instructions links details out each one of these line items, so please use that as a reference for further detail. Similar to Form 1099 NEC, you must also file Form 1099 miscellaneous for each person for whom you withheld any federal income tax. And once again, that's regardless of the amount of the payment. And once again, federal withholding is reported in box 4. Next slide, please. A few things to note. Report on Form 1099 miscellaneous only when payments are made in the course of your trade or business, so personal payments are not reportable. You are engaged in a trade or business if you operate for gain or profit. Nonprofit organizations are considered to be engaged in a trade or business and are subject to the reporting requirements. Nonprofit organizations are considered to be engaged in perfect. Lastly, Form 1099 miscellaneous should be filed by February 28th if you file on paper, or March 31st if you file electronically, but the recipient must receive a copy by January 31st. So since the form does need to be prepared by January 31st to give to the recipient, we also like to file these forms by January 31st if possible. Next slide. So for those of you who are not familiar with Form 1099 miscellaneous, this is what it looks like. Similar to NEC, the payer's information goes on the top left, the recipients on the bottom left, and boxes 1 through 3 and 5 through 15 report the various payment types, and federal income tax withheld in box 4. Boxes 16 through 18 are reserved for state information. Once again, this does not have to be reported for IRS purposes, but the instructions do provide further detail on this if you do need to report those, report that information. Next, we will discuss some best practices when filing Form 1099, NEC, and miscellaneous. It's important to request Form W-9 from recipients as soon as possible. You should also make sure all transactions are posted and the books are up to date before calculating the totals that need to be reported. Remember to check to make sure the payment was cash, check, or ACH transfer. We don't want to include payments that were made via credit card, debit card, PayPal, or other similar third-party payment networks, as this type of payment will be reported on Form 1099-K, which we will discuss later. On the next slide, you will see a copy of Form W-9. This is pretty straightforward. It should be given to recipients to request their identification number. The recipient would list their name, address, and check the appropriate box for federal tax classification at the top, and then list their taxpayer identification number at the bottom. Next, we will take a look at Form 1099-K, but first we will address polling question number 4. How many IRS 1099 forms do you normally file? 0 to 10, 11 to 50, 51 to 100, or more than 100.
All right, everyone knows the drill. So we'll just give this a few more minutes, a few more seconds, and then we'll close out. I know we're a few minutes over, but we got started a few minutes late. So just be patient and we'll have you out of here by noon, just in time for lunch. All right. I am going to close out the poll. Last chance, everyone. Great. And I will share the results, Julia.
So it's pretty much 50-50, 40% close to the 0 to 10 range, or 11 to 50. We've got 6% at more than 100 and 11% in the 50 to 100 range. So pretty spread out, but generally under 50 is where most people are filing. So looking at Form 1099-K, payments made with a credit card or payment card and other types of payments, including third-party network transactions, must be reported on Form 1099-K by the payment settlement entity. Form 1099-K should be received by January 31st if in the prior calendar year you received payments from all payment card transactions, which are debit or credit card, and in settlement of third-party payment network transactions above the minimum reporting thresholds. So gross payments that exceed $20,000 and more than 200 transactions, and gross payments for goods or services that exceed $600 and any number of transactions. Next slide, please. A reportable payment transaction is defined as a payment card transaction or a third-party network transaction. So a payment card transaction means any transaction in which a payment card or an account number or other identifying data associated with a payment card is accepted as payment. And third-party network transaction means any transaction that's settled through a third-party payment network, but only after the total amount of such transactions exceed the minimum threshold. Please note that the minimum reporting thresholds apply only to payments settled through the third-party network, and there is no threshold for payment card transactions. And next, we will discuss some best practices for Form 1099-K. When you receive Form 1099-K, it's important to check your receipt records and merchant statements to confirm that the amount on your Form 1099-K is accurate. If Form 1099-K does not belong to you, contact the payment settlement entity listed on the 1099-K to determine why you received the document. If there was an error by chance on the form, request a corrected copy and keep a copy of the new corrected copy that you receive with your records, along with any correspondence that you may have with the payment settlement entity. Next slide. And then for those of you who aren't familiar with Form 1099-K, this is what it looks like. Box 1 is the gross amount of the total reportable payment card or third-party network transactions for the calendar year. Box 1B is the gross amount of the total reportable payment card or third-party payment network transactions for the calendar year where the card was not present at the time of the transaction. So this would typically be something that relates to online sales, phone sales, catalog sales, things of that nature. Box 3 is the number of payment transactions processed through the payment card or third-party payer network. And 5A through 5L is the gross amount for each month of that calendar year. So next slide, please. So the last slide we have here, as I mentioned, is a list of IRS resources that can be used as a reference. In addition to the specific instruction links, which are 2 through 5, you should also use the current year general instructions for certain information returns, which is link 1. The general instructions provide information like who would file, where and when to file, electronic reporting, taxpayer identification numbers, back withholding, penalties, things of that nature. So generally anything that would maybe cover all types of 1099s and not one specific type. So definitely a good idea to reference those links as well. This does conclude the 1099 section of the presentation today. Please use the resources as a reference as we approach the 1099 filing season, which is coming up in this January. So right around the corner.
All right, great. I don't see any questions. So if anyone has a question, if they want to quickly put it in the chat. If not, we'll conclude the session today. Again, thanks to everyone for your patience with us and moving through each of the 3 sessions. They all ran pretty smoothly, so I'm happy about that. Tomorrow morning, look for an email with an update to, I'll make myself visible here, for an update to the links for the sessions tomorrow. We really do recommend that you use the link to save it to your Outlook. That way you have all the information and it's saved. You can just accept it and you'll have the link. So if anyone has any problems or they're not sure they're going to get the email, please email me and I will send you the link direct that way. Oh, we do have a question. Let's go back here. Will we get recordings from this session? Yes, we will. Everything will be posted to the website. We upload them to YouTube and then we share the link. So give us a few days. It might not be the end of this week, but it'll certainly be by next week. So the slide decks and everything, so you can just keep checking back to our website. We'll also send an email letting everyone know that those links are alive. So give us again a few days, if not until Monday of next week. All right, great, everyone. Thanks again. We'll see everyone tomorrow morning at 9. Thanks especially to Jenna and Julia for doing a great presentation for us. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.